out, Vanessa. It's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really is.
My blog.
Blog for you.
Yeah, I started the blog. I mean, I was blogging, for a hot minute here and there. And then when I got cancer, I really took it up, and my way of communicating with people what was happening with me. And then, now I was in Israel, it gives me kind of a platform to say, this is what's happening there. My mom said to me, well, she asked me many times, she's 90, but that's another story. She said, had my opinions changed? And I said, absolutely not. I am more steadfast and solidified in what I thought was happening there, and, how we have responded. And, this week is particularly sad today and yesterday.
Oh my God, how horrible.
It's so horrible. And there's no light at the end of the tunnel. I don't know that I can be so, hopeful or upbeat. I can tell you this, the Israelis are resilient. They have all, gathered around each other and volunteered, and they're picking, the fields, because the kibbutzim, they call it the envelope of Gaza, Otef Aza, and they Gaza. When I was at Kfar Aza, you can see Gaza, and we heard the shelling, and our guide said, "Oh, that's us. Those are our homes." And I don't know if they're going to move back. And I working with a student, she said, are they doing that so that they keep up? There's a fine line between bearing witness and terror tourism, because you go see all these places, and they're burned up, and it's pictures, and I think on Faranza, they have not returned for the most part, and they have to make an individual decision and then a group decision, because let's say you want to go back, but the Chadarochel, the dining hall's not, ready, and you don't have a kitchen. It's a very complicated situation. And I think we all know that it's very complicated in Israel anyway. And if there was an easy, there's an easy solution, we would have found it by now. So everyone, when you're there, they assume you can speak Hebrew. So I spoke a lot of Hebrew, which is good for me. And I hadn't been back for 10 years. And I want to go back more often. And that plane ride, though, it's a killer. It's a killer. I'm getting too old.
You have to stop in London.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea.
Yeah,
Elaine said to stop in London. The Mifgash, the meeting was 3 days. I was the oldest person on that meeting, which actually was hopeful, that I have colleagues who are younger, who are passionate about this, and they're going to go out and teach about Israel.
Did you notice any surprising things about the politics?
Well, I tell you what, I found was a little bit surprising, is that we went to a religious kibbutz, and you assume, if they're religious, they're in Bibi's back pocket, and they were mad. The tropes that I heard: where was the government? Where is Bibi? Where were the soldiers? Why did it take them so long to get to where they were? Because they were on the West Bank protecting settlers who were celebrating Simchas Torah. And where's the money? Like, if they need to rebuild, they need something from the government. And, I just don't think that the government has the wherewithal to do any of that. I mean, I personally can't stand Netanyahu. So that's, Vanessa speaking. I'm not speaking for her.
Well, one of the interesting articles that I read over the weekend was that he has a problem because the Orthodox Jews don't want to fight.
Right, what was you going to say?
Well, so here,
They never have.
yeah, this is his problem.
But now it's a problem.
Now they need them.
Now it's
No, the problem is more than that. He said that they're gonna have to go in the army, and then he backed down.
What's the correlation?
Because those are that's his base. And so, listen, the Sephardic head rabbi said that if the Haredi have to go in the army, they're gonna leave Israel.
Yeah, go where they go.
And I said, don't let the
They're
door,
going to New York.
yeah, don't let the door hit you on the way out.
Right.
Go out.
They take taxes, we give them, you get a stipend for every child you
Right.
have, I mean.
Why can't they go in and not fight? They can help
There's bookwork.
because all these
Yeah.
men are serving, let them serve in kitchens.
I know, there's a
It's a
million
million
things,
ways they can.
a million things they could do. Let's just do this. Yeah. Listen, we can only hope that they stay true to the, to keeping the Haredi to go into there. Evie. Wait. You're unmuted now, go ahead.
The question that I had about them not wanting to fight, I understand they're not wanting to go into the army, but in terms of theoretically, do they want the fighting to continue? Do they want to follow Netanyahu's philosophy, or is it separate from, yeah, fight, but don't include me in the fighting?
I think, listen, I personally, Vanessa, think they're the most selfish part of society. They take everything, they give nothing back. So, I have no idea, and they can use some excuses, but the army's kosher, they can pray. The army makes a lot of, what's the word?
Accommodations.
Yeah,
Accommodation.
that's the word, accommodation, so they can be in the army. So I don't know.
It was just a random thought that all of a sudden occurred to me as you were speaking. So.
Yeah. They're praying. All right, Sandy, go ahead.
Well, one of the accommodations that always bothered me is that they, in order to give their votes to people like Netanyahu or whoever, whatever coalition, there's a price for it. They insist on running the schools. They insist on keeping the movie theaters closed on Shabbat. They insist on buses not running after 3:30 or 4:30 on Friday. So poor people, and there are a lot of poor people in Israel who don't own cars. They can't really go anywhere on Shabbat. They have controlled all the social part of Israel for so many years. And that was the price. They ran the schools, they decided what textbooks could be used, and they ran the social life and the housing too.
I totally, completely agree with you. When you make a coalition, so again, what Bibi would do is say, oh, you can run education, which is just terrible for the reform movement there. It's just terrible all the way around. So, listen, I hope that there's a change in government. Bibi has an invested interest in keeping the war going, because the minute he's out of office, he's gonna be indicted, they're gonna.
Should have been in jail 7 years ago.
He should have been in jail 7 years ago. Here. Okay, on to Rachel Kadish's document. So this is what she looks like. She's really pretty.
She wrote The Weight of Ink.
Yes, and she wrote The Weight of Ink, which, if you haven't read it, I highly recommend.
No, I haven't.
It's a little long.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite books. I loved it. Loved it.
Yes,
I
I just love, I didn't read, I knew her name sounded familiar.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, Weight of Ink. Yeah, that makes sense.
It's very credentialed if you look at all the things that she's
Yes,
won.
yes. So, let me just pull up her. Rachel Kadish is the award-winning author of the novels The Weight of Ink, I loved, From a Sealed Room, I Don't Know About, and Tolstoy Lied, a love story, but I'm going to check them out, as well as the novella I Was Here. Her work has appeared on NPR and the New York Times, Plowshares, Paris Review, so on and so forth. She has been a fiction fellow of the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Massachusetts Cultural Council has received the National Jewish Book Award, the Association of Jewish Libraries Fiction Award, and the John Gardner Fiction Award. and was the court writer in residence at Stanford University. She lives outside of Boston. So she is indeed very, very credentialed and yeah. So tell me what you thought. Why do you think that the title of this story is The Argument? And for people in the room here, you have to speak, channel your inner Vanessa and speak loudly. Yeah,
I
Izzy.
loved it. It took me the second time reading it to understand what the argument was. The argument was not, I don't think, with the Rabbi Jacobson that he visited. His argument was with God, I think,
Oh,
which I realized.
Izzy
on
said
the
his
last-
arguments with
Which I
God.
realized on the last page.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I could go on, but I don't know.
I thought the argument was with himself because he was debating whether being oblivious, like the rabbi, was a better choice than living with shame, which was not that big. He didn't do anything that bad.
Yeah.
To him, what he did to his son was blown way out of proportion.
The one thing that I was thinking about with the old rabbi, Kreutzer.
Now there was Jacobson.
Oh, right. Oh, the rabbi, right, Jacobson. First of all, skipping to the end, I thought it was very clever how he tricked him into saying where the deed was.
I think he just
Absolutely. Absolutely.
thought
It's
of it.
not unlike,
Yeah, that's
it was like in Legally Blonde, when she said, you know, what designer is this? What designer is that? What's your lover's name? And he just says it because it's all on one hook in your brain. But what I kept thinking, and I'm living it a little bit, is, when you're in a Jewish profession, who tells the rabbi or who tells any professional here that you're losing it, that there seems to be a cognitive decline. And I have seen with I'll call them my rabbi colleagues, that sometimes you go to a funeral and you're like, oh, he's old and what happened? And I'm Alice.
Yeah, I agree that I feel like the argument was with himself. I really felt this story reminded me of another story we read, but I can't remember which one. But I felt it was a man towards the end of his life trying to figure out, was there meaning in his life? Did he do the right things to his children? I mean, there were, two big issues with, both of his children. And so I felt like he was trying to, come to some kind of reckoning with himself.
And Izzy, people in the room, you gotta yell. Lynn. Wait.
Hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Okay. I think this was one of the most difficult stories that I read in this book. It is so packed with so many different issues. I had trouble. I as an English teacher, the transitions were missing for me in many of the places. But the argument, and I agree, I think it is with himself, but this is what I kept asking myself. Why do Jews argue? We have that reputation of being argumentative, but I think he gets to the heart of that, and I would substitute debate instead of argument. The debate is between two sides, and I think that the reason why Jews argue is or debate is to get to the truth, and the truth depends on whose truth it is. And in this story, you've got two different sides of truth. To me, the heart is he's trying to, and it's slipped in at the very end of the story of how his son died. His son was sitting in his room reading, and a plane goes off course and hits the building. And and that's how his son dies. And he's trying to now decide whether to forget or forgive, because he's not functioning well. And when we're in the midst of arguing with ourselves, do we forgive this person or this thing, or do we forget it? This is, to me, the essential question of life. And it's very interesting. My husband and I and a whole group of friends have been debating this issue for the last month or so, which was prompted by, I'm not going to go into it, but we kept saying, how could she forgive? This was a woman who forgave Auschwitz. And we're saying, how can you forgive that? And so that was my take on it, but there's so much more in the story. We could spend a week on this story and not get to everything there is, but I agree, it's with himself. I think he's trying to get to the truth, his truth of how he should proceed in life. At one point, he thinks he should totally forget everything. And then he said, that doesn't work. So that's my take.
Izzy, and then we'll come back to, we'll keep going back and forth. Real loud.
Okay, to me, the whole theme of the book is
Can't hear you.
and forgetting,
Louder.
like forgetting.
Can't hear her.
No.
Sorry. I usually don't. Forgetting. He thinks that it would be wonderful, oblivious. He grows to admire the rabbi Jacobson.
We can't hear.
Yeah.
Is your
Sit, wait.
speaker?
Should I
No,
go?
She could
no.
say it,
There,
and then you could repeat it.
Right, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, that it was forgetfulness. That he
The
was
whole
wishing
theme was forgetfulness
Forgetfulness
and
and-
forgetting.
that if you forget the Holocaust, if you forget what's happened, you will be freer and happier.
If you
And
forget, you're freer.
You're freer. Okay, and then he doesn't go to synagogue for 20 years. He cuts himself off. And the reason he does that is because he's angry at God. He goes back and he's angry.
He's angry at
God because
And he
he
cut
doesn't go.
himself off from synagogue.
But then he goes to visit Jacobson and he finds some kind of comfort.
He finds
And he's
comfort in the old
jealous. I
rabbi.
think he's because he has a son
Right,
that he's cut off. But
right,
he can forget about him. He's angry at him because he married a African-American woman.
right,
But he's jealous that he can just be this
right.
calm.
That Jacobson is very calm because he can't remember anything. There
Right.
is something to say about
and
that,
forgetfulness.
that
Okay,
forgetfulness.
so at the very end, which is why I make my case about.
Right, the very
At
end.
the very end, he says atonement at the new year for both types of sin.
Atonement is made for both types of sin. What page is it
This
on?
is on the last 540.
540.
Man against man, man against God.
Man.
And he says, you are wrong. There is a third category of sin. And then he says, before he says, God has picked my pocket. I think it's God against man.
God against man. God had picked my
That
pocket.
God, this horrible thing happened. You can't forgive God. And
Okay,
that is my theory.
He
that
can't forgive God. I
He's
agree with
he's going to the rabbi.
that. Judy agrees.
He's going to the rabbi to try and get some solace because they were so close. He realizes the rabbi can't.
Oh, I don't think they were close.
But they wrote, he said he wrote him like.
Mm-mm.
No, they were arguing.
Right now, we get a lot of crackpot letters and
But
I don't know, we would
but he
call
said-
those people close to us.
But he said after his son died, he wrote him like 50 letters of condolence. He wrote him 50 letters of condolence. I mean, they had a thing going,
have
but
an
they had
impact.
they had a relationship.
They had a
He
relationship.
wrote
I'll
him
grant you
every
that.
Sunday and every Wednesday he wrote him back.
Yeah.
And so they did have a
Right. They
relationship.
had a relationship. I don't know if I'd call it a friendship. Okay, I'm going to go to Terry, then Judy, and then I'll keep going. Terry.
Okay, couple things. First of all, on page 526, Lynn, you alluded to the idea about debate. It said Dovidel, as he was called affectionately, was instructed in the skills of debate. When God's people debate his tradition, he knows they love him. True faith, the rabbis taught, was an unresolved argument. Jews argued. In his heavens, God laughed and was satisfied, and how he loved their labor. So I do feel that he was kind of describing the argument in this way, that this was
Right.
something that God felt was important. The people, if they debated their tradition, then they had faith. So I thought that was kind of interesting in regard to the title. The other piece I just wanted to mention, I don't really know what that means. God picked my pocket.
Yeah,
I don't either.
I was trying to figure it out, and I don't know what that means.
Thinks
I think
it means he
means
took everything away from him.
His money, everything he
His
had.
money.
Excuse me. Yes, everything.
The other point I wanted to make was the humor when he had a conversation with his daughter. I thought that was such a great, if I can find it, because I was reading it on my Kindle, but when she said, when they were discussing, she called him a racist, and he said, oh, he hadn't meant any disrespect to the Schickses. He was simply stating a fact. So he didn't really understand. He thought that he was doing a good job. And she said something like, when you're ready to enter this, it's a new world. In case you haven't noticed, Dad, you're a dinosaur. Oh, do you have any plans whatsoever to even visit the modern era? I certainly hope you'll let us know if you're coming. We'll leave a light on for you. So I love her writing, because I mean, that's such a wonderful little repartee with his daughter. Thought that was great.
I know I can't say Schwarza, but I didn't think Shiksa was so bad.
Exactly.
Terry, are you done?
Yes, thank you.
I too,
Real loud.
I believe that he was arguing with God. I think the story is much more than that argument. Look on page 532.
532.
Paragraph that starts with memory is cruel.
Right.
And when it talks about now in the mornings, the night visions swirl about him, the stubble on his face is white. He's an old man. He longs for a single thread of argument to shepherd him past his sleeplessness, the clear pulse of debate in which he used the murmuring of God. I think this was more a story about how to look at the loss of memory and of dementia.
Yeah.
And how it affects our lives, our families' lives. If you're a rabbi, your temple.
Yeah.
I think all of the people that are affected in this story are affected because of his dementia, not because of an argument. And
Interesting.
the argument is they're used to having this, as Lynn refers to it as debate. They're used to it. It's the way of life.
It is the way of life.
And when you have a portion of that way of life removed, it damages a lot of things. Some people will think it's a gift.
Yes.
Some people will not.
Yeah. Abby.
Okay, I just want to, well, actually maybe tie the two together a little bit, but go back to what Lynn was saying in terms of forgiving or forgetting. I think that forgiving is never about the other person. It's always about you're dealing with the issue. And so often we think about, plus the quote, I think it's Maya Angelou, who said, it's not what you say or do, but how you make me feel. So often we have these feelings or these remembrances, but we don't remember what the incident is. We remember what the feeling is, and that's what we hang on to. And I think that's the forgiveness part, that you kind of have to do that, because our memories change, and the details of what happened and what even happened. And I remember many years ago, this was a family, an extended family member. There's some incident, and she said, we forgive, but we don't forget. And that stayed with me, and that bothered me too, because I don't know how you necessarily separate it. But when you forgive somebody, the person sometimes doesn't care. They don't even know you've forgiven them. They don't know if you've held on to the feeling. So I think it's for you to do the forgiving so that you can move on.
Very interesting.
I agree.
We agree here. Janice, real loud.
I still maintain that it's a classic literature theme of man against man. I think his whole debate is within himself. And the debate between him and the rabbi, I don't think they're religious. I think they were intellectual. I think that his debate whether to go on in life, what better to go on and suffer or to just forget. So I think it's all within him, and I think they're valid points.
Okay, he had a valid point.
He is a valid point in my opinion.
Alice.
Yeah, a couple of things. One, I just wanted to comment about God has picked my pocket. That is said by Kreutzer after the rabbi talks about atonement, you know, man against man, man against God. But I feel it's almost, he's saying it's God against me, God against me, and that he can't quite figure out. And that's what the other thing I wanted to, for me, the crux of the story is on page 537. He says in the middle of the page, and why now? Now that he has at last decided that there will be no more memories, nor guilt, nor struggle, now that he has decided to embrace oblivion with all his being, why now should his daughter speak? You know, he sees the rabbi not in oblivion. And he starts thinking to himself, I think, well, maybe that's better. He doesn't see that his son, the rabbi's son, really hasn't been the best son. He's off in, I think, Colorado or somewhere skiing. And you know, and he has the struggles of guilt about what happened to his son, and also he has struggles with his daughter, you know, how she was when she was younger. And so, you know, I think he looks at the rabbi and says, oh, maybe this is good, just to not engage, you know, his mind in any of these things in the past, even in the present. But then, you know, then there's the whole thing with his daughter who's now pregnant. And I think that is so important because, you know, he says to her I think he calls her and says, is there anything I can do for you or something like that? And I think it's like, that makes him want to engage in life. And I think, you know, any of us that have grandchildren, I think it's so, I mean, we all have our issues and things that are hard. And I always feel that knowing that there's like another generation, that pulls me into, even though it's difficult, even though there's guilt and there's this and there's that, bad memories, that you still want to be engaged in life. So I think that.
Resilience. Okay, I have Merle and then Sue, Lynn, Beverly, Yusuf. Meryl, tell us your story. You're there, aren't you?
You're on mute.
Merle? Oh, wait. Unmute.
She's
There we go.
muted.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Dementia is something that we're all going to have to deal with one way or another, meeting people in our family as they age. Well, Saturday night, I happened to go to a party where the guest of honor had dementia. It was my brother. He's about to turn 88 and he lives in New York and he was a professor. He published many, many books on Russian history. And we all stood around and tried to talk to him. And he said nothing, absolutely nothing, until I told a story about how when I was in Los Angeles, I met a director. It wasn't Steven Spielberg, but I talked to the director about one of his books called Lenin's Brother. And he took a tremendous interest in the book, the director. And he said, let me put the title in my phone. And if I want to, you know, maybe someday I'll make a movie about it. Well, my brother, who had said nothing all night, complete cognitive decline, looked at me. He said, "Thank you for taking an interest in my work." And so what I got out of this is that people who have dementia, they're listening. They're listening the whole time, but they're paying no attention at all unless it's something that's heartfelt for them. And then they'll speak a perfectly complete sentence, because my brother cannot finish sentences. I mean, you have to give him, when you can't find the right words, everyone has to complete the sentence for him. And also, the other thing I wanted to say about this story is that Kreutzer says there is a third category of sin. And I thought that was the sins that we commit against ourselves.
Mhm.
We cannot forgive ourselves. We cannot forget things that we should just say, forget it. And I
Mhm.
think that was a very important point, that Kreutzer saw a whole third category of sin.
Sue Wellick. Sue, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, one of the things that I don't think anybody's talked about are his dreams. He had all these dreams that were really frightening him. And one of the things that it also brought out was he was so focused on his Orthodox religious belief that when his children were young, and when his Iris had these babies, he couldn't bring any of it back into his memory because he was so focused on his religion. And then when she died and his son was killed, his religion just kind of went out the door because he was so disappointed and so angry with God. But I found the story interesting, but in some ways difficult to read, because sometimes it was very disjointed.
Mhm.
And I had to keep going back to remember who belonged to who and who was who, because it was confusing. But I do think that this man was just, I think there was a lot of guilt. I think he felt very, very guilty because he couldn't remember when his children were small. And that's really sad.
Lynn, Beverly, and then Janice. Lynn, go.
A couple things I want to react to. First, Judy, this idea of dementia, I think, is really important. Rather than dementia, our inability to remember and to have memories. And he says he cajoled the rabbi into precious memory. And I want to go back to debate, because I took a course in college on debate, and it really had an impact on my life. On page 527, he says, the boy thinks. Intellectualism or thinking is really primary in Judaism. It's the basis of arguing back and forth about a point. And the point you don't have to have a winner in this. It's the fact of getting, to me, it's the highest form of thinking, because you get into both the mind of another person and you see what that person is thinking, and how you are thinking, and how those things clash. And that idea of both sides, he mentions things that are unfair or unjust in the story. And really, to get to justice, you really need to see both sides of a story, and of a person's point of view. So if you go to the 539, and this idea, which someone just mentioned, see, my memory's going. If he absolves himself, and guilt, I believe, is within him. For years, he has known that he mustn't absolve himself. This is what's killing him. He feels guilty because if Kreutzer admits his own powerlessness, his lack of control, if he admits there was nothing he could have done different, then there's only one other to blame for what should never have happened. For an airplane failing mid-landing, smashing into the single building along the base's airstrip that was occupied, the building in which David Kreutzer's son lay on his cot reading. So there you have the truth. That's the truth. So who do you blame? He blames himself. Why? I mean, he's trying to get to this his whole life. And if he blames God, then that's a whole other issue. And he doesn't want to have that, his faith totally destroyed, because faith is in having the ability to think and reason. God gave us that. So honestly, I think everybody's point of view is right. That's the point of the story. I think that the ability to argue and debate, as we do in this class, which is priceless, we try to get to the truth. And my students used to say, well, who's right? when we would have debates and discussion, and they'd say, I said, you're all right. Your point of view is all right. So it's whatever you believe the story is about. I think it's all about everything that you've said.
Okay, Beverly Newsome.
Hi. So actually that quote on 539 was very meaningful to me also. And this story was so profound and had so many levels. And in the beginning, I was laughing because it was very funny that the bit about skiing on page 524, that Black people shouldn't ski because they have no camouflage. And if God meant Jews to ski, he would have chosen Norway instead of the promised land. I mean, I'm reading this and I'm laughing. And then it kind of goes on and it's sort of humorous and you don't exactly understand what's coming. And it becomes very, very sad, the story. And that part on 539 is something about fate and something about things that humans can't control, God can't control, and things just happen. And that's the part where when things happen in our own life, and we have to come to terms with our powerlessness, that's really very profound, because a lot of us, including me, are someone that always wants to fix something, looking for a solution. Who can I call? How can I fix this? And there have been a lot of things in my life that I had no chance of being able to fix. So who's to blame when that stuff happens? I think a lot of it is just things happen, and there is no scapegoat and there is nothing that can rectify it. But the saving grace here is the baby, the new life, the baby that she is going to let him be part of. And I thought that was just so beautiful. I mean, I went from laughing to shedding a tear in this story. And I just wanted to say one other thing that really made me laugh before I got sad. On 525, when he's talking about his daughter, she stopped seeing movies and started seeing films. And she met people named Portia and Nikita and married a violinist, you know. And the reunion and the dementia, and the idea that if you could never remember, because we don't always remember the joy, and we don't remember the good stuff. And when they were babies, we tend to remember the bad stuff. you know, the last moment in someone's life or the time they were mean to us, our minds are very cruel to us. And that's what I wanted to say.
I have Janice, then Terry, Elaine, and Judy. Janice, real loud.
I thought the story had so much meat in it that I thought the whole thing with Marjorie, her being a heroin addict, it was unnecessary. I think the only purpose of her was the baby. I saw it as extraneous and the storyline not necessary for a short story with so much purpose. But the baby does add.
Kind of wraps it up. I think.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I forgive him because of the baby.
okay. Terry. Wait,
I'm on mute. Never mind.
you're good.
Okay. So first of all, I think the reason that he blames himself for his son's death is that his son said he was going to be a rabbi. And he made kind of an offhand joke about it. Like, oh, everyone thinks they can be a rabbi or whatever he said. And then his son decided to become a doctor. So if he had been a rabbi and not a doctor, would he have felt compelled to go, and would he have ended up in the war zone? I mean, that's just a little tidbit that I kind of think might be true, but who knows? The other piece is we didn't really talk about the very, very beginning. When Kreutzer reads in the newspaper about a thing called false memory syndrome. A new syndrome just discovered happens when something terrible a person thinks they remember turns out not to have happened at all. Kreutzer sighs. Imagine such relief. And I think that really sets the tone for the story, because the story is so much about trying to forget the terrible. And the Marjorie piece, I think, yes, it's important that she's having the baby and that he's going to be a part of that. But I also felt he didn't really understand, because she stopped talking to him because the way it was described, his brother wasn't around. She was mad at her brother, and they didn't really say goodbye. They didn't leave on good terms. And so she stopped talking to her father because her brother wasn't around. And so she kind of took it out on her father. But when she acknowledges that after that happened, she went into such a terrible state that she was on drugs. And if Yuri hadn't come along, she'd be dead in the gutter. And he has this realization, oh, she was suffering too. He never really even thought about it. He was suffering, and he was suffering that his wife died, but he didn't really connect with his daughter, so they weren't suffering together. And I think that was kind of a very important piece, because clearly in the end, she wants him to be her father. She needs him to be her father and the grandfather to her baby. So that, you know, is an important kind of closure that he gets to get with her, which I think is really special. And the other thing, I have, you know, done a little research, and I actually found something that was so dense that I couldn't even really understand it. Some student did a thesis on the implications of the Holocaust in history, and they included the argument as part of the thesis. It's student thesis something. I mean, if anyone's interested, it's a very, very long thing, and it includes a lot of other readings, but it talks a lot about what Rachel Kadish, how she fits into this whole thing about memory and forgetting. But the little piece that I had sent to Vanessa says, for some, only a story can really open heart and soul to new perspectives and new thoughts on how we live our lives. Suggesting one in particular, a story by Rachel Kadish called The Argument. She reworked some of the images of old Jewish men familiar in American fiction, but her story is fresh and challenging. Does one forgive or forget past wrongs? Can we repair our relationships with our own souls, or should we be envious of those struck by memory loss? Kadish's protagonist wrestles with these questions, and through him, so do we. So I think that's kind of interesting, because basically it's saying, Should we be envious of someone who has Alzheimer's and they can't forget all? In fact, he even talks about would you be guilty if you murdered days and years and, weeks? He goes through that whole, bit about that. And I think that it's a lot about whether you are better off without the memories, or whether having those memories gives you a time to reflect on what that meant and where you are today. I think that's kind of where it sits with me.
Elaine, real loud.
Okay, I think that in our lives, when we're young, we're one person, when we're old, we're another person. And I think that people, whether they have or not, you tend to color your stories and you tend to work them out in your mind so you can live with your stories, whether you remember or not. We all look for forgiveness as we get older. And I think that's just human nature. We can't die with all the guilt.
Interesting, very interesting. Judy.
That is interesting. Lynn, I now know why you and I think the same way. Truthfully, I was in a debate class too, and I was on the debate team at college. And I will tell you, you are assigned a side, but you have to be able to switch to the other side.
Right.
So you have to understand everything. And I think that's what she did. Concept of, she gave us the people that he was interacting with and why some things were good and some things were not. It was the argument. She showed me.
Right, right.
Side thing, and Lynn also said something about to get to justice, you have to know both sides.
I have
So,
to know, I have to.
I'm taking that. Okay, Alice, Evie, and Merle, and then Sandy.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something about the discussion about dementia. I feel the author, Rachel Kadish, kind of set it out on that first page, the last paragraph, when, Kreutzer is first visiting with the rabbi, and he's saying, and a rabbi never stops being a rabbi, even when he thinks the president of the women's division is her dead great-grandmother, even when he tells the sexton, he goes on and on and on. But he concludes, a rabbi is still a rabbi. I think that has a lot to say about, Merle was talking about her brother. My mother at the end of her life had definitely severe dementia. And it's like, so it's hard to say, because the person acts and talks so differently than what you remember the essence of them being. But I think it's so important to say they're still who they are, even though they don't have the memory. It's very difficult. It's very difficult. I know at one point, talking about arguing, I know at one point I had a psychologist say to me, just agree with whatever your mom says. Just go along with it, because I'm very argumentative, and I was argumentative with my mother, and it just when she had dementia though, what did it do? It didn't change her, and it just got me all upset. So this psychologist said, see, my mother used to think I was her sister. So I used to say, no, Mom, I'm not Anne, I'm Al. And it was like, he said, just go along with it. Just pretend that you are Anne. So one other thing about dementia, what Merle was saying about her brother, my mother, I used to show my mother old pictures because she kind of would remember, who the people were, or I would tell her, well, this is, Dink, your grandson when he was little, blah, 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 blah. And I showed her a video of my son's bar mitzvah, and she went nuts in a good way. She remembered the cantor chanting. And she said, oh my God, I just want to watch this over and over and over again. I mean, this happened many, many years before, but it was like that music just got inside of her and she never forgot it. And it was like that gave her a lot of joy to hear that chanting of the cantor.
Ellie. I got you, Ron. I have Sandy there. Whoops, I'm gonna unmute you. Abby, go ahead.
I think this whole discussion of memory is just so daunting for all of us because it's just something we can't put a finger on and never know. Even if we're talking to somebody, we don't know where they are and what we're attributing their reaction to or their memory or whatever. But I'm a collector of quotes, and one of the quotes that's really on my bulletin board all the time that helps me is, how can I see this differently? In terms of just even maybe twisting something around and doing the opposite. And some of the gurus that I sometimes read in the middle of the night kind of say the same thing. But I also was reminded of an anecdotal thing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg when she told the story of her mother-in-law when she was newly married, when her mother-in-law said to her, sometimes it's beneficial to be hard of hearing.
Right.
I just think, I don't know, there's just so many layers to this story. And even the relationships that maybe some of us have had a hard time getting straight. We pick things up, little nuances in relationships. So like with other stories that we've read, after the discussion, I really liked it a lot more than I did before, but I also didn't understand the pickpocketing at the end.
Merle.
On the subject of debate, I remember being in a high school. It was a high school advanced placement American history class. And the teacher wanted us to debate something. And he said, Merle, you're going to take pro-imperialism. And I was not pro-imperialism. So I had to get into that way of thinking about, well, how did the imperialists think about it? And the profit motive and all the things about acquiring more land, more countries, more knowledge of the cultures and spreading our culture to their culture. Anyway, in the middle of this presentation that I was doing that I spent a lot of time on, I completely burst out laughing because I thought imperialism was so stupid and wrong. And it really made me get into the thoughts, but it was so embarrassing at the time, and even remembering it, I'm just feeling embarrassed. But I think it is good to try and understand the other side. Also, the last page where Kreutzer says, he tells Jacobson, we are old men, we have little to offer, but what we can, we must. And I thought that was very important, that sometimes when people are older, they feel useless. And, I was thinking of my brother with word retrieval, how he couldn't complete a sentence. Well, even if you don't have dementia, sometimes you can't find the right word. And we are just, entering this phase of our lives. And yet we have to try and consider, how can we be helpful? What can we do as old people? And I thought this story raised a very important question by stating that.
Sandy, and then Lynn.
I liked what Evie said about memory. Memory is very important to me. And what Merle said too about dealing with people, who have dementia or have lost memory. I don't know why this story, it brought back a memory that it was so deep. I hadn't thought about it in years and years and years. But when I was a child and we were brought up in an Orthodox synagogue, and we couldn't sit near our fathers or talk to them or anything. And I was sent to Cheder. And I was really one of the best students in the room. I don't say I was the smartest. I definitely wasn't, but I was a good student and I listened with attention. I respected the rabbi and everything. But when I turned about 11 or 12, and I was growing very, very tall, the rabbi suddenly changed my seat to the back of the room. And I was seated in the last seat in the row. And he hardly ever called on me to do anything. And the boys were paired off. You remember this in the story. That's how the yeshiva is done, they work in pairs and they're taught to argue. But the rabbi hardly ever called on me. And it wasn't until like 30 years later that I understood why. Because at that age, 11 or 12, he's thinking she might be unclean. And I wasn't to come up to the front of the class. I wasn't to intermix with the boys. I was the only girl left. All the other girls had moved out of the neighborhood or moved away from the shul. The thing that saved me was my mother. She was brought up in that Orthodox thing, but she started taking me on Sunday to a Reformed temple. She kept me in the cheder, but on Sunday, there was nothing conservative in the neighborhood. So she took me to a Reformed temple where we weren't members. They even had an organ playing. I thought I was in a church or something. And one of the most famous rabbis in the world was the rabbi there, Gunther Plaut, who later became the head of all Canada. He became the head rabbi of all Canada. And he saw that I was this shy little girl who knew Hebrew, but I didn't fit in with the Reformed either. But he made me feel welcome. He made me feel like I was as important as anybody else there. And that really saved me. And I could never go back to Orthodoxy because they have this thing about girls. And that memory, when I was reading this story, that memory came back to me about how the rabbis, the Orthodox rabbi, treated us.
Hey, Lynn,
I almost forgot what I was going to say.
come on.
All right, I'm coming back to the story. We can't at the end of the story, I was getting really upset because he was talking about, well, I'm gonna lose my mind. I'm gonna forget. I'm not gonna, I'm gonna lose my memories. That's the best way, oblivion. And that's impossible. Because if you forget experiences and you forget the terrible things, you're no longer there. As we see, my sister has Alzheimer's. She doesn't have memory of anything. And she's not herself. She's no longer who she was. She's a different person who has no memories. So you can't, that's an impossibility. And I think the author's saying that. I think she's saying you can't forget. So what's left? Forgiveness. If you have those two choices, you either forget or you forgive. And if you remember, the problem with remembering is that you think you could have changed something. And this is what is bothering him. He couldn't change that airplane from going into his son's dormitory. So he realizes that he has no control. And that is really disturbing. It's haunting him throughout his life. But then he says, but I have to live. I mean, that's what Judaism said. Life is supreme. I have to live despite all of this. And so I think the pickpocket at the end, and I got this all from you guys talking. I think when he said God has pickpocketed, what does he say exactly? I should get this. God has picked my pocket. I think he's taken away all his defenses. He's taken away everything that this guy has used as a defense from remembering.
Yeah.
And he has to remember. And to remember is to have those memories that make you who you are, whether they're good memories or bad memories. So I think her point at the end is you have to live. And if you're going to live, you have to, forgiveness is the only way that you're going to make it through life.
Rose said, God has picked my pocket is so meaningful. And the last line is so meaningful. And I think that, we've seen him, take a journey, Kreutzer, and we have to wrap up in a little bit. And, we have forgiveness, and then we have holding a grudge. my mom, you can't tell her. But
Oh,
cognitive decline and
okay.
and she can't remember, you know, my grandkids' names. But the other day we were talking about my dad's first cousin, and she goes, he wasn't at the funeral, was he? My dad passed away. He wasn't at the funeral, was he? And I'm like, well, that you remember. So I do, and like, look what Merle's brother remembers, like, once in a while, I'll say some, you know, Arthur's first cousin, he's divorced. It's Mayan mass. So, but when you see her, don't say, don't say anything. But
Don't worry, I won't remember.
Right.
I won't remember. Yeah.
So, you know, I think it just gives us, you know, I always love what you all have to say. It makes me think about the whole thing and, you know, and Alice, oh, Alice had to leave. I'll have to tell her. You know, I just can't argue with my mother anymore. She, you know.
Right. That's
It
right.
is what it
You're
is.
supposed to do, you're supposed to go.
There's no sense in it.
You're supposed to go along.
Right,
You're
right.
not arguing.
Although she said that's what the psychiatrist says, I do think I need therapy. Don't argue with her. I have to take like, you know that I'm excited and passionate, so when I go
There's
there. I just-
actually an organization called Caregivers.
Caregivers, okay.
And they help people who are taking care of dementia people. It costs money, but she does have free things on her site
Okay,
that help.
I'll take a
Are
look.
helpful.
Take a look.
That's the universal thought.
Merle, did you have one more thing to say?
Just one more thing about Judaism in general, that when Kreutzer finds out about his daughter's pregnancy, she's 40 years old, the pregnancy is like a verse of Torah. It cries out for interpretation. And I thought that was a wonderful line, because whatever happens in our life, we have to take time to consider it and interpret it, and no snap judgments about anything. And I thought I really walked away remembering that line of the story.
If you notice, we only have one more story left.
Yeah.
So, I think our next book, Chad here, oh, it's Candle, Feather, Wooden Spoon. That is, referring, something you do right before Passover, B'dichat Chametz, and a lot of people had to drop off. So as soon as I have the recording, I'm gonna send that out this, tonight. And it's by Rabbi Zoe Klein. And she was here, on a Sunday. And I think that these stories some of them are easier to read, but they have the layers that we can drill down and really talk about.
Could you repeat the title of that book again?
Yes, it's in the chat. Candle, Feather, Wooden Spoon by Rabbi Zoe Klein. And Beverly, I'm gonna email it out to you and.
Thank you.
Assuming it's on Amazon.
Yeah, on Amazon, you know. Lynn. Wait, I muted you.
The dates for the next, is this April 17th? Is that correct?
That is correct. Wait, let me.
Okay. Letters from Doreen.
That's our last one.
Okay.
April 17th, right before Pesach. And then May 1st.
Oh, I'm not gonna be here, am I? April 17th.
We'll talk about what you wanted. I'm gone part of the summer, so I need to take off July, but maybe we should take off June and August. So you know what? When I email everybody, you can email me back what you think is the best plan of action. We have to take, I don't care. I'm here. So, I've read the books. And there's questions at the end of each chapter.
I have a question with your nighttime book.
Yes.
You come in and out depending. on-
Yeah.
I
yes.
just bought
Yes.
the McBride
Okay.
book. So.
Okay, I'll talk to you about the evening book club. It's great to see everyone. This week, we have Sunday morning, is Rachel Stier, and she wrote a book on Betty Friedan. And I think you guys, listen, I think you'll really love it. And then the next week, on Sunday, is June Hirsch, and she has cookbooks from Holocaust survivors. She's gonna sign the cookbook. I'm gonna ask some people, maybe some people on this Zoom, to make some of her recipes, so we have a little snackaroo. And it's in the afternoon, but we're still gonna have lox and bagels,
Are you
maybe,
gonna meet in person for both of those?
yeah, both of those are in person. Both of those are in person. So, if you have any questions, you can email me and I'll send you the recording and the name of the book and the author as soon as I get the recording.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Welcome back.
Thanks.